Welcome to Casual Conversations, brought to you by Momentum Ministries, helping you attain, maintain, and regain spiritual momentum. Let's join the conversation with Scott Wade, president of Momentum Ministries.
It is good to welcome you to Casual Conversations today. I'm Scott Wade, your host, and I'm happy to have with me Dr. Henry Spaulding, a retired professor. Listen to me, brother Spaulding, you just better forgive me now. My mind is elsewhere today. I know yours is too, with some situations that your family's going through right now. But anyway,
Yeah.
Retired president of Mount Vernon Nazarene University. Welcome, brother Spaulding.
Certainly good to be here with you.
I'm glad that you made time for us today, and we're going to dive right into this topic of just war. Not that it's just war, but war that is just. So you can't get confused of the direction that we're going to go. I don't remember how we arrived at wanting to talk about this topic, but certainly it is a very applicable conversation to have today for Christians because of what's going on in the world. There's just a lot happening. And I know that we are recording this podcast several weeks before it will come out, and things might change. They might get better, might get worse. But the principles that we're going to talk about today, I believe, are going to be constant, and that you'll be able to share with us some things to help us understand war. When is it just? When is it not just? When can a Christian support, or if a Christian can support war? And questions like that. I'm not going to tell you where to go or how to get there, but I'm just going to ask you to talk to us about war and when and if it's ever just.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I've always said to students through the years is that at its root, war is violence. It's the willingness to violate another person's sovereignty, another person's income, another person's resources, and you see that in almost every war. You can see that in the Bible with the Syrians and then the Babylonians and then the Romans. It just so happened that Israel was right there in the pathway. I don't think many people were interested in Israel, but they were on the way. It was on the way to other places they were interested in, and so they got hurt. But the willingness to violate is certainly a part of what just war is. And also, we have to ask ourselves, as you have playfully said already, what does a just war mean? It doesn't mean just war. It means, is it possible to wage war within a climate that you could say virtue is at stake? And that's a hard question to answer. I don't think anybody ever fights unless they think it's worse. It makes them worse. And for example, in the Civil War, the North had twice the resources, and it had an industrial complex, and yet it took them 4 years to subdue the South. And that was partly because Robert E. Lee was a superior strategist, but it was also possible that the Southerners were fighting for their own home, as opposed to the Northerners who were coming down. Another thing that we ought to consider when we're dealing with war is how has modern war changed things? I remember when I was at Trevecca, I was a history major and a religion major, and we had a seminar on Tennessee history. And we went through one of the major parks there in the Chattanooga area, which memorialized a particular war. And the person who guided us was a kind of philosopher of war. And he says, back in the days of the Civil War, a bullet would knock you down and kill you. You wouldn't have to be shot but once by it because they were heavy and that kind of thing. And so he was postulating the fact that war was more brutal in the Civil War period than it is now. I don't think that's a sustainable argument, but certainly we have made war much easier because we can watch it on television now. I was struck in the early Desert Storm under George Bush the first, and we were actually seeing live shots of helicopter, Apache attack helicopter deploying bullets toward a site, and it almost, for many people, it might have looked like a movie, but it isn't. There are real people dying in that thing. And then another issue that we always have to consider, we talk about war, is who is innocent? You've seen a lot of talk, and I heard of a lot of talk, I know, in our society about the situation of reparations for the families of slaves that were captured and brought over here. And that comes up every time. If you be innocent in a situation where you're in the superpower, so that struggle is certainly there, because when it comes to war, you have to feel like that you're innocent, or at least you're defending innocence in the process of that. And for that matter, what does war look like when it's not a war between us and Grenada, for example, or it's between us and Russia and us and China, for example, or China and Japan? The destruction is much more widespread and long lasting. And then the question of, can you ever engage in war as a Christian? You probably know the name of John Yoder. He was a well-known pacifist, and that's a position that has some legitimacy, but I'm not sure pacifism would work on a national scale. But the stepping away from violence was really important to him. He had other problems, as you're probably aware, but that wasn't one of them. And then, can a Christian live in a state enjoying the benefits without the willingness to defend it in times of war? So those are some issues to keep in mind. Now, when the Christian church was founded, there was no such thing as a just war theory, because of the fact that we were not in power and we were being persecuted. So there's no need to. But with the ascendance of the in Middle Ages, where the Christian faith subdued the paganism of the entire continent of Europe. Now that came back in the Renaissance. That's another issue to talk about. But the fact is, we were not in a position of power, and so we didn't get to talk about such things as just war. Just war is a product, therefore, of the church being in a position where its voice is respected and occasionally heeded. Now, if you go back far enough, just war probably has its roots in a philosopher or teacher of rhetoric named Cicero in the late Greek period. And he was the first one that encouraged a kind of organized statement of just war theory. And he lays it out pretty much in the way it exists today. He believed that an ideal state where law is based on right reason rather than utility, the only just cause for war is a defense of national interest, and it has to be formally declared. So you can't just do it and say, I was in the right. So this isn't Chuck Norris here. This is the benefit of being able to say that the church, the school, the nation has made the determination. And there has to be provisions to preserve the life and health of prisoners captured or those injured in the war. But and he wasn't a Christian. He was just an early proponent of just war. But the first Christian, Augustine, one of the great theologians, philosophers in the 5th century, he's the one that began to propose just theory in pretty much the form it exists today. And for him, there is no such thing. Cicero would never find an idealistic state. You have to be more realistic at that point. He felt that natural law and natural reason can afford no basis for peace and justice, because society is ridden with a desire for honor and greed, power, wealth. So justice becomes the orderly pursuit of these common desires, with a Christian relation to justice to man's highest end. So justice for a Christian is not to preserve justice and peace and those kinds of things. For a Christian, justice is determined by its end. And so because of that, he admits that no war is fully just. Things happen in war that you can't call justice. But a just peace is desirable. However, war may be the only way to bring that order into place. So he believed that a just war is one that's posed for, declared for the right reason, is proportionate, and provides the basis for a just peace. So those are the three main ways in which he justifies
Augustine?
War. It's Augustine, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Soldiers should fight in repentance,
Who
lest
said
the
that?
rulers turn that into greed and conflict, and you unwittingly do what's not just, But
So let me back you up. Soldiers should fight in repentance.
they should, the way I said it to students always is, when we fight war, we must do it with tears in our eyes, that we live in such a world that's so broken and violent. But we do know that at this point in the world, it appears that the scales are really tipped toward power and justice. If you can look at hearkening back to Ukraine, which won't be resolved by the time this thing comes out, I can tell you. But you can say, "I want peace," and that very night, lob 400 drone attacks into a country that's basically defenseless. And then warn the U.S. that if they provide them weapons that would reach Russia, then that would be a problem. And so those are the kinds of things. I mean, the desires. I don't want to read anybody's desires about anything. I believe for all those who don't support Trump, whether you do or not, I believe him honestly that he wants peace and not conflict. If for no other reason, just the economics of it, because war costs a lot of money. Now, following Augustine, you got Augustine, who really is the father, a late church father, in the sense that he is at the end of the ancient period, and yet what he does is gather those resources and becomes you can find in his theology and philosophy the seeds for the medieval philosophy, which reaches its apex in Thomas Aquinas. And I'm finishing now a 2-year project. I haven't finished it yet, but a 2-year project of reading the Summa Theologica every day. I read several, maybe 10, 15 pages, and but I don't decide that way between questions. As you know, the Summa Theologica is posed in terms of a series of questions and then answers and objections and so on forth. It's shall I say, not the most fun reading I've ever done. It's the scholastic method. But Augustine there are two people that speak very broadly into Aquinas's theology, and that is Augustine and then Aristotle, a pagan philosopher. So he often refers to him as the philosopher. So you have to figure out. You do very soon that is Aristotle. His moral question focuses on the consequences of war. So when he talks about the just war, he wants to know what the intention is. It must be, under no circumstance can be revenge. It must be to secure peace, not to kill, not to conquer, not to gain at all. Justice is determined by the law. Now, he is a natural law person, and he refers to that several times in the Summa. And it's the ordinance of reason for a common good. And a common good is a world without violence. Therefore, one must be governed by those laws that derive from natural law. And that's what he does. Aquinas is hard to see an evangelical in there, but he is certainly a person who understands that the God who created nature gives us a clue for how to live in the world, And so there he ends up with the same way, but he doesn't get Christ's perspective. For him, it's the end. And that's certainly teleological, which is Aristotle to the core. Now, Augustine as well, he's really more Platonic, but the two philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, as you know, Aristotle, a student of Plato's, they're both on the same page in a lot of places, and they're pretty close here. So uh, Aquinas is a help for us to understand. If you don't, there's no reason to fight a war. Now, Putin allegedly wants to reconstitute the Russian Empire, to reconstitute the Soviet Union, and so that stands behind whatever he does. That's not a just war. That is a war about expansion and theft and violence. Now all wars are violence, but and you might argue, well, as a student back at Mount Vernon, we had a name of a guy with a PhD from Cambridge who came to speak on nonviolence because, as you know, Ashland University is based on the Quaker ideal of pacifism, which is radical reformation. And I'm coming to that in just a minute. But one of the students stood up and says, the whole story of the conquest of Canaan is Israel coming in, displacing people who have been there for 1,000 years. It's hard to know. It's like us coming here and displacing the American Indians. So, it's a lot of what history comes to mean is who gets to tell it. And the people who get to tell it are the people who win the wars. So just one more thing, and then we can get into particular questions. Just war theory is evident in modern political thought, but because of the reformers. The reformers came in and broke the hold that the Roman Catholic Church had, and you could say the Greek Orthodox, but it's really the Roman Catholic at this point, and therefore they don't argue based on the efficacy of trying to bring retributive justice to situations because they're not in power, and that's out of that theory comes what's called what some people call the latter part of the Reformation is the radical Reformation, and that's where you get the Quakers and others who are radically pacifist and not as sacramentally driven as the Roman Catholic Church. And they say, as Hauerwas has said, I've heard him say it many times, and I've read it as well. If nothing else would convince me of just war theory being wrong, it's the dumb arguments that they make to support it. Of course, that's nothing more than a tagline. I mean, Hauerwas was not always an honest debater because he would push people's emotions, and I've seen much superior ethicists just crumble because of his throwaway lines, that kind of thing. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about just war.
What does the Bible say about war? Is Jesus a pacifist?
Well, one of the things you have to always understand, the Old Testament is as violent as it gets. The conquest of Canaan, what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously the understanding of God that is that the predominant understanding of the Old Testament is these are God's people and God promised us this, we're going to do it. And there's lots of violence in the Old Testament. And that turns people off sometimes. And I said, the truth is you can't do what a lot of people try to do these days, is place a modern moral theory on top of an ancient people that they were, the Psalm is it 137? Happy will we be when they dash your infants against the rock, which was a normal pattern. When a conqueror would come in, they would grab the infants by their feet and swing them down and hit them on a rock or something that would just bust their head up and kill them, So, reading that in the Psalms, which you kind of go there for comfort, and you do find some there, but you do find a lots of statements in the Psalms which wishes violence upon their enemies. When Jesus comes, And I'm not saying that we can discard that and make light of it. I'm just saying that you can't talk about a Christian understanding purely on the basis of the Old Testament. Jesus comes, says, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm not interested in you, Pilate. I'm not interested in Herod. I've got another kingdom in mind that transcends this space and time, but yet includes it, you know. And so you can't find much of it. But of course, you go to that Revelation, what you got there? You've got a lot of violence, cosmic violence in the New Testament. So the Bible it can't be reliably quoted by a pacifist at all. I mean, the fact is that a lot of people say, well, pacifism, they bring this to John Howard Yoder and say, well, when Jesus came to the temple, he put some strips of leather together and he turned the temples around and cracked his whip and abused people. I said, well, the truth is he did not do that. I mean, he did turn the tables over and he was unhappy with what's going there, but he didn't hit anybody, so it was more largely a symbolic act, which was foretold in the Old Testament. But so a Christian, from my point of view of just war, is don't get too comfortable that any war can be categorically determined to be just. War is at its heart violence. But you understand that the world we live in, you can't just, as Timothy Smith, who was one of our first historians in the Church of Nazarene, who taught at Johns Hopkins, I heard him say this myself in one of my classrooms. I was teaching, but he'd come in as a guest, that we ought to all beat our weapons into plowshares. And I said, well, then we just all go to the east and await for the Russians and the Chinese to show up. I mean, that kind of idealistic pacifism passed away a long time before Timothy Smith was saying that. But so anyway, the Bible itself does say, I think you could make a good case for this, blessed are the peacemakers. You're happy. And so we have to live as a kind of counterculture movement in a culture that is defined by war. Matthew 22:21 says, give the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and God the things that are God. Matthew 5:29, but I say to you, if do not resist an evildoer, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to the other. I had a pastor when I was really young. I was maybe 16 years old. I was out doing pastoral visits with him. And he looked at me and says, I really believe that if somebody were to hit me on the right cheek, I would turn my cheek like Jesus said to do. But if they hit me the left time, I'd pull the gun out of my glove compartment and blow them away, And, that was a blessing that day, Jesus says in Matthew 26:52, put your sword back in its place, says that to the Peter, who pulls the sword out and cuts the ear off of the one of the soldiers. So the New Testament doesn't it recognizes that violence cannot be overcome with Hallmark cards, but it does say that if we begin to participate in the very violence that we're attempting to defeat, we become part of the problem.
So I got several things that I've jotted down a few notes as you've gone. Violence cannot be countered with a Hallmark card. And that enters into the diplomacy versus not aggression, defense, diplomacy versus defense. And some people are not going to change by words alone. You won't be able to convince them.
That's right.
How long do we wait on God and on the Spirit of God to move and convince them? Do we continue to try to convince them? Do we depend on the Lord to do that?
Yeah, I would think
Keep writing Hallmark cards.
Yeah, stop the Hallmark cards. Start sending far size cards with your own message in between.
Yeah, the far sides are.
I would say that what the Bible says, and what Cicero, the first person who started talking about this, is you only enter into war when it is nothing else you can do. You know, the trouble with war these days, though, is that we don't have armies on opposite sides of the river lobbing bombs at each other. We have the kind of violence that's kind of intertwined. Guerrilla war or terrorism is a form of war. And terrorism is a kind of war that people who are powerless wage to inflict, the World Trade Center, for example. That's not going to defeat America, but it's a rallying point to say we can do this. That they haven't done it since then, but there've been multiple kinds of war that takes place in Africa and other places, and I don't all the love and flowers you want to go onto the enemy, because we do have an evil presence in the world, satanic, that sows strife. And so you have to address that by being strong, but don't become driven by a soldier,
Okay, you mentioned early on the fact of just war depends upon the consequences. What about a war that's entered into with righteous or worthy consequences or intentions, but it ends up doing something different? Is consequences versus intentions for a war. How do you know what the consequences are going to be before you enter into it?
Well, you don't, but you have to decide what you're aiming at. I don't know what the consequences will be. I think one of the most powerful things I ever read was with the massacre of the young ladies at the Amish school in Pennsylvania. I read a article by Steinmetz, who was at that point, I think he's now retired or dead one, I don't know for sure, but Steinmetz at Duke Divinity School, and he says and I think there's something on Angel Network now, a movie about that I think I saw it a year ago or something, but what the people of the town could not understand is that the Amish went and asked if the wife of the murderer had if she needed anything, and they were sorry for what had come on her house. And those were some of the very people whose children had been gunned down in the school.
Mm-hmm.
That works on that's a logic that doesn't make sense in Washington, D.C. or in Columbus, Ohio, or anywhere else. It's a logic that says that we're not going to allow violence to overtake us. Now, on a national scale, if I were president, and I never will be, don't want to be, never saw that as a realistic option, and seeing what that secular place is like. I've never lived anywhere in my life that was more overtly secular than Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. It was ridden by people who were looking for power primarily, and that's all sides, not just Republicans and Democrats. But I do believe that you have to ask yourself. It's like I've often thought that war doesn't. You don't have to wait until it's world war. I don't think there'll ever be another world war. There will be skirmishes, and we'll never line up our troops and go in another direction. So I think that's what Bush was trying to do he probably knew as well as you and I do that they weren't any nuclear weapons in Iraq, but he does know that if you take the war over there, it's not coming over here as easily. Now, that at least at that point, it's been a long time since then. So the question is,
okay, go ahead.
Do you at what point do you say, I'm not going to wait till the last moment. I'm going to interdict. I'm going to go after that. It's like what's going on these days where Venezuelan boats are coming over with loads of fentanyl and it's being blown out of the water, Now, probably it's just because Trump did it that caused people to be upset about it. But the fact is, once that gets into the country, it's much more difficult to deal with. Sometimes you can solve the problem more easily. I'd have a hard time doing that. I mean, they ought to I've often thought the Venezuelans ought to be smart enough to dress everybody up like a priest or a nun and put them in the boat with the fentanyl and see what would happen then. But who knows? People are generally not that reflective about it.
Hi, I'm Amy. Are you ready to take the next step in your faith journey? Start Climbing with Mark is a short but powerful booklet designed to help you grow in Christ. The 16 devotions from the Gospel of Mark will help you attain, maintain, and regain spiritual momentum. Whether you're just starting out or looking for a fresh start or seeking to encourage a friend in their faith, this resource is for you. Order your copy today at momentumministries.org and let's start climbing together.
Well, that's an interesting thing because I had one of my questions here is just war. I forget what you said, but not being the aggressor,
Yeah.
but being the defender, and there has to be a bit of defense in that thought of defending the homeland, defending the citizens. Is just war. That's changed because you can't
Yeah.
fight it inside your borders anymore. You don't want the battle to come. And I don't want to beat a dead virus, but some people they don't have to come here. They can send a virus on a passenger on an airplane.
Yep.
How do you respond to that kind of violence against? And I'm not saying that is what happened, and that was a man-made virus. COVID was a man-made virus intentionally sent, but that possibility is there.
Yeah.
How do you respond to something like that in a just way? Do you just sweep it under the rug, say it never happened, or they didn't mean it, or oops? I've never been quite satisfied for that, and even the fentanyl thing that we can say that we've adequately addressed that from a defensive issue. How's that enter into just war?
Yeah, that goes to the point of what works well for me on a personal level as opposed to what works as a national policy. And the COVID virus illustrates the most dangerous and probably what our final war will be. It will not be nuclear. We got enough sense to know that will be it. But it is that sickness, viruses that have come and they go. As somebody told me back, I happened to be president at Mount Vernon during the day when Governor DeWine called all the independent college presidents in a group call and said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. We don't know what this is. We don't know how bad it's going to be. I'm going to ask you to do social distancing. And then the very next day, he called and says, close up your dorms and send everybody home, which is what we did at great cost to the university, but probably saved life as well. I think that there's no way Augustine or Aquinas or Luther would have ever had a way to understand this kind of war. So I would think it would always be just to be the aggressor then, because then if not, you're trying to correct a problem that you don't have an answer for, an antidote, so to speak.
All right, let's okay, take it to a very hot button political item. In eradicating a virus is difficult. What about eradicating a neighbor who is set on your destruction and who have stated that? Is there justice in something what we're seeing in Gaza? And I know that there's a lot more involved in that than what I understand. But you've got an enemy that's vowed to defeat you and your people. Is it just to reach out to that enemy and destroy them where they sleep, not let them come in where you sleep?
Yeah, but the problem is it's so much wound up into the fabric of the innocents. Now, I don't, you ask yourself, well, there are no innocents in Gaza. They all support Hamas. Why? I don't think we know that.
I don't think
But
so.
we also know that what Hamas is doing, if they had a chance to do that here, they'd do it here too. Looked at October the 7th and the record of the atrocities there. I would have to say that even if you see that, you're still defending yourself, because this enemy is going to slide in under you like you're a South Carolina person. I live down in Florida. It'd be a rattlesnake that blends in and then strikes you in such a way that you couldn't prepare for it. Now, I've had so many snake encounters growing up that even to this day, you're not going to get me sticking my hand in a bush to get something out. I'm going beating on that bush and see what crawls out of it first. So I do think that if you have a responsibility for the government or for my family, I be honest with you, I don't own a gun. I've considered it of late, but the trouble is that my first responsibility is to protect my family. Now, if I'm a president, my responsibility is to protect the nation. And so preemptive strikes, I think, would be just if they're proportionate. Don't drop a nuclear weapon on Gaza, for example. And if you're going to do what we did with the nuclear storage facility and launcher there in Iran, announce it in advance and let anybody who believes that we might do that leave. Obviously, not everybody believed it, but
Well, and some of the people who may have wanted to leave,
well, I mean,
they
it's right
couldn't. They were
because
forced to stay.
yeah, that's right. I mean, those bunker busters, I think if you bomb, but when you build your headquarters under a hospital, I don't know how you defend that other than to say, and I think the Israelis have said, leave, and you see people walking out of there with these big bundles and stuff tied on the back of trucks and cars. It would be a miserable existence for sure. But there's no way sometimes. I don't think there's a way to protect all innocents. At some point, you have to be willing to primarily make sure you're living your life that you have just motives, that kind of thing. But I would not say that it would be wrong to be preemptive in some of those things because that saves a larger conflict. And I have some fears that conflict's already present in our borders now.
All right, let's wrap this up, and this is going to really maybe get uncomfortably close to home.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we've spoken about being retribution as justice and prevention as fighting a just war. But what about legal ramifications and things that there are people in the country recently attacks on immigration and customs agents, and how does the government respond to that? And if the government is in the wrong, is it just for them to respond to those things when we're trying to protect and preserve the homeland? Is the homeland worthy of protection and preservation too? I guess that may be what it all boils down to. But you see, rather than on a war scale, on a more local scale of security, police forcing, those kinds of things, what's just there? What's
Yeah.
just in the manner of how you protest those things? Is it just to take the life of somebody else so that you can protest what they're doing that you might consider as harmful?
Yeah, the strangest casualties of our time is that words become violent. The recent passing of Charlie Kirk, for example, who I didn't know a lot about. I listened to several of them. I thought he was a fantastic debater, and I didn't like the fact that he wrote a book called "College is a Scam."
I guess you
That back
wouldn't.
when I was president there. But the truth is, I had more than one person in the government has said he was a hate monger. He was a fascist. See, what it is he was a violent person because he disagreed with me. And so if you disagree with somebody, what violence have I perpetrated on you other than to show you the fallacy of your argument? So from my point of view, one of the problems with discussing this issue as opposed to 5th century AD, or for that matter, 13th century AD, it It is that we have now weaponized our language to the point that hate speech is anything that you disagree with me about, you know, even if you're speaking the truth. Now, as a president, I dealt with a number of attorneys, and I can tell you, attorneys will be the first to tell you that the legal issues are not a matter of what is true. It's about who gets the strongest argument and wins the day. We're not seeking the truth anymore. One of the real riptides for us was years ago at Mount Vernon. Some group of students decided to post a bunch of posters in the room in a lounge where primarily our Black and Asian students were, and it's okay to be white. Now, isn't it okay to be white? I think it is. But I did some research on that and found out that it's okay to be white was carefully chosen to pit people against each other in such a way that it wasn't about being white, it's about causing conflict. So language has become a tool for aggression. I think as Christians, we ought to know that there are people in our borders that immigrated here because they were in fear of their life, because they couldn't make it go, because they couldn't get medical services and those kind of things. Immigration, if we had the courage to have a reasonable immigration policy in America, most of what happened during the last administration could have been avoided. But as I heard Tom Homan say the other day, I've arrested people from 129 different countries. What it was is under the cover of that, and then children being abused and lost in the system. It's a phenomenal moral failure for the United States, because it pits us against, as a Christian, there's many of injunctions in the Old Testament, especially, that when an alien is in your borders, treat them as if they were a citizen, treat them as well as you would, and provide for them like what you would a citizen. What the problem is that you reach a resource issue there, and so it becomes a challenge. This recent, some call it invasion. I don't know that I'd go that far, but the recent influx of people who you don't know who they are in the country has created the opportunity for this violence to grow within. And anybody who knows history knows that when you cannot take care of the people in your borders, that's when crime and violence grow. As a person who was from Portugal said, when that happened over there, it was in the slums where terrorism began in Europe. You see the stuff in France that happened, some time ago. So we're dealing with social issues that are far more difficult than the simplistic political slogans that we espouse can create. I mean, I think we ought to be as compassionate as we can, but the trouble is not the people that are here that they can't get a job and therefore the rest of the country pays for it. It is the people who are here who want to destroy the country, some of them elected by their constituents to serve in Congress too, So that's a little bit of my bias on that.
Okay. Well, brother, before we go, is there anything that you didn't get to say that you want to?
Well, I will close this saying I probably said more than I should have said anyway. So,
Well, I may have asked, to be fair to you, I think I may have asked you a little bit more than I should have.
Well, in the way I grew up, if that's your position, you can support it. But in our country now, that if you say something people don't like, they show up on your doorstep and you do death threats and that kind of thing. So it is really a toxic, irrational world that we live in now. A world that I can't understand as a former college professor and administrator. But I tell you, even at Christian colleges, this tears people up. So
Well,
I mean,
we're looking for the King of Righteousness, the Prince of Peace. We're looking for
and I think we've lionized Charlie Kirk, and I really appreciate his standard. I watched every minute of that 6-hour memorial service, with many times with tears in my eyes, mainly because of two young children that don't have their father and a young wife that doesn't have a husband, because he was on a campus debating people with no intention to hurt them. But mental illness figures into this. At some point, we can. I'm not the one qualified. Get yourself a psychologist or a social or behavioral scientist and say, at what point do we distinguish between the presence of evil and mental health? One of my professors who ended up at Notre Dame in charge, the chair of the religion department, used to say, we just ought to admit there's just some evil people in the world. They're not mentally ill, they're evil. And what we often do, like the guy pretty close with you in North Carolina, who just stood up with no provocation and stabbed a 22-year-old Ukrainian girl who was just getting off of working, and killed her right there. It bothers me that we allow mental illness to be the cover to allow that kind of thing to happen.
So I better hush. If we're forced to wear masks is all I was going to say. Okay. All right, brother. Let me pray for us, and I appreciate you coming on. And
sure.
I do pray for you and Sharon, and we'll continue to pray for you and your family in the days to come. Father in heaven, I thank you for Brother Spaulding. I thank you for the years of experience and wisdom that you have put in him, and that he is willing to share that with our listeners today. Lord, and I know that if there's ever anybody that's brokenhearted over war and death and loss, it's you. But we know that sometimes it's necessary, because there is indeed evil in the world. Help us to fight evil, and to not wage unjust wars, even on a personal level, but to examine our motives and to make sure that we're living according to the standards of Jesus. Bless Brother Spaulding, his family, and may your presence be an encouragement to all our listeners today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you coming on.
Sure. I'm glad it occurred to me. You must have been thinking, because I don't know that you emailed me, did you?
I may have and I may not. I don't know. But
I looked and I said, well, maybe I got the wrong date,
maybe,
but
maybe I'm in spam now. I've emailed you so much that
you got a whole subject, you got a whole folder, but I said to just all of a sudden I said, podcast, and so I got in here as quick as I could, and
you did great.
I got to wear my Charlie Kirk hat here.
Is that what?
Freedom.
Okay.
I had one said Sunbury. I said, I don't want to try to get everybody to move to Sunbury.
Okay, good. Even if it looks like what's behind you.
Yeah, I know. I thought I'd gotten that off, but I didn't do it. So I'm going to stuck with that for the rest of my life.
You work on it, brother.
Yeah, I just should put something behind me, just books and stuff like you. I got a few books in here. We used to do that.
I bet you do. The difference is you read them.
Well, I do read them, try to understand them.
All right. Well, thanks again. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in and watched our casual conversation today, been a part of it. God bless you. Have a great day.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening in on Casual Conversations by Momentum Ministries. Check out our website at momentumministries.org, where you will find books and other resources to help you attain, maintain, and regain spiritual momentum. God bless you and have a great day.